Most people have heard the term relativity, usually with reference to Einstein and his discovery that space and time are relative to the observer. There's no such thing as absolute space and time. So time as it flows for you will be quite different from the time flowing for somebody else who's travelling fairly near to the speed of light. If you've watched the movie Interstellar, you'll have seen that some people go down to a place near a black hole, and for them they're there about an hour, and they come back to the spaceship that's away from the black hole, and the guy that's waiting for them is aged 50 years. Well, that's the relativity of space and time. It's a real thing, it's not fictitious. So Einstein was a bit of a turning point for our thought about reality, really, although this idea of relativity is older than that, and in fact it goes back to a number of people actually, one of whom is Kant. I'll get onto that in a moment. But you can see a quote here from this guy Leopardi. Somebody put me onto the Zibaldoni, if that's how you pronounce it. I don't know, several years ago I actually bought a copy of the book. It's a huge book, about 2,500 pages. Zibaldoni means hodgepodge, and that's exactly what it is. It's a hodgepodge of notes by this young brilliant man. I think he died in his 30s or 40s, I can't remember exactly when. A lot of the notes are of no interest to me, but a lot of what's in there is of interest to me. So it is a hodgepodge, and you just have to kind of read it hoping that you unearth some gems. Anyway, let me get to this thing of relativity of existence. The basic claim here is that the world that you know is your world. It's not the world, it's your world. There is this idea that there is an absolute reality. And there are two classes of people who believe in absolute realities. There's very, very smart philosophers and metaphysicians and those kind of people. Hegel believed that there was some kind of absolute. Spinoza believed that there was a thing called substance, which was the absolute reality. And Plato and so on, they believe that there's some kind of absolute existence that we might not know directly, but it's there anyway. And actually even Kant believed that with his thing in itself. So there is a reality there. Just like before Einstein, people believed in the reality of an absolute space and time. So many people still believe in the absolute reality of a world. We might not perceive it in the way it actually is, but it's there. Well, my hope during this podcast is to persuade you that it isn't there. That the whole of existence is relative. I did a podcast on this a while ago. I think it's probably on Patreon, but this is a long-standing idea of, it's not really just my idea. It's a long-standing I don't know, what do you say? It's a long-standing axiom for me of about the nature of our existence, that everything sees its own movie show effectively. There is no real thing going on. We all just see a movie show. Anyway, I've kind of described how Einstein changed things. He did away with the notion of absolute space and time. And those things are dead. So sooner or later people will realize there is no absolute reality. It's all relative to the person or the creature that is experiencing. So, this guy, Leopardi, he said there is almost no other absolute truth except that all is relative. Very succinct way of putting it. That it's relative means that there is no absolute thing. There's no, exactly the same way, there's no absolute space and time, there's no absolute truth. There's no absolute reality. It's relative. Plenty of people, want you to believe there's an absolute truth. The religions are about that. Anything from Buddhism, the absolute truth is the void or no self. From Christianity, the absolute truth is that there's salvation through Jesus Christ. The Hindu religions, well, there's Brahma and there's whatever the others are, I can't remember at the top of my head. There are various gods that manifest in various ways, and it would be a little bit unkind to say it's all bullshit, but I'm kind of erring towards that. So let's talk about this idea in a slightly more formal sense, that we live in our own bubble of experience and it is completely relative to us. And we might have ambitions to try and find out about the nature of absolute reality, but that absolute reality is just something in your imagination. You will never know it because it doesn't exist. And even if it did exist, you cannot know it. This was Immanuel Kant's take on the whole thing, that your senses, your sensibility, operates in space and time. Space and time isn't a feature of some absolute reality, it's a feature of your mind and the way your mind works. And of course Einstein cemented that even harder with showing that in physics space and time are relative to the observer. So, if you go down into the details, well, we have colour sight. A lot of animals don't have coloured sight. So does green really exist? Well, no. It's part of your own movie show. Is sugar really sweet? No, it isn't. It's part of your own movie show. Things like that were called in philosophy the secondary qualities, but Kant went on to show that even the shape of something was, people had previously called it a primary quality, was actually, even that was a quality that's produced by your mind, part of your own movie show. So that's the senses, and interestingly enough, bats, as you know, navigate by sonar. I read something interesting the other day that bats have sonar wars to deprive each other of finding food, so they'll jam each other. Nature, read in tooth and claw and in sonar. So that's our senses, but Canton went on to say, well, actually, it's not just our world perception that is our own bubble. Our thought, the way we think, is our own bubble. It's not, our thought isn't absolute. It's not something that can give us the truth. And he went through to define a number of basic structures in our thought that allow us to think in a particular way, but not any other way. Kant's work, A Critique of Pure Reason, is a great work. And various philosophers have been a little bit. It's a little bit kind of fashionable these days to be impatient of that kind of thing. But Kant was a turning point in the way we think about the world, if you understand it. So, bear that in mind. Not only your senses are giving you a world picture that is just your own thing, it's your own movie show. There's no absolute reality involved in all of that. And people, well, scientists particularly, strut around like prima donnas saying, well, science gives us a truth. It doesn't give you the fucking truth. It gives you an account of the way you represent the world. So science is just an account of the way our minds represent the world. It isn't a true account of the world. Because there isn't the world. There's the world that we know, but there isn't the world. Now, if you've got any interest in this kind of thing at all, then there's very contemporary work going on in this kind of field. There's a guy called Douglas Hoffman, I think that's his name, wrote a brilliant book called The Case Against Reality. He's a psychology professor somewhere or other, but he goes into the depths of this, and he says quite accurately that the way our own movie show, this way we perceive the world, has only one aim, and that is for us to exist and survive long enough for us to have kids, so we can, perpetuate the species. That may seem like it's not totally related, but it is. And he goes on to show some very, very, actually quite complicated stuff about how our sense of vision, for example, which in reality is 2D, our brain turns it into 3D, but the 3D image gives a lot of error correcting. I'm not going to go into all of that, but if you want to see how the world that the movie show that we live in is our own particular thing, then there's a lot of contemporary research in that area. Another guy is Metzinger, who calls our world a simulation. Although in calling it a simulation, he's obviously assuming that there's something being simulated. And that was Kant's take, actually. He said, well, this world that we know is our own representation of things, but it is a representation of something. And he called the something the thing in itself. Well, that may be the case, but as far as I'm concerned, it's a kind of waste of thought, because if there's something that we can never know, well, why talk about it? So, taking a slightly deeper philosophical look at it, and I'll wind up on this point. The world may just be, how can I put it, just relative to the creatures that are perceiving it, and there may not be any actual thing that is being represented. Now, people say you fall into solipsism very easily with this. Well, no, you don't. And in fact, there's nothing wrong with solipsism. It's unfashionable, but there's nothing wrong with it. Solipsism is the idea that there's nothing existing outside your mind. That's the basic idea. Which is kind of true, isn't it? If you can tell me of something that you know exists outside your perception of it or your thinking about it, then please let me know. So, the crucial point is that the whole of existence is relative. And that is the point that Leopardi was making. And, I could have just left it at that. This could have been a 15-second podcast. But I've given it some background. But he states it very succinctly there.